Mic check 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. Thank you. And a happy Tuesday to you, Central Georgia. Thanks for tuning in here for a look at your extended forecast. Not much to talk about besides cold, just each and every day throughout the rest of the work week and as we go into the weekend. But we will break down some specifics with the cold. First and foremost, if you did miss it, as of yesterday, we're going to go ahead and talk about our recap with our ice accumulation map. Now, the National Weather Service is still working on gathering some reports over here in eastern Georgia and up in the northwest corner of the state. But I do imagine they've gotten a lot over the last 24 hours, and they are working on sending the final survey of all the ice reports that we did receive over the course of this past weekend. So breaking it down from north to south, as you can see these red areas, the darker red shade that you get into, that's going to be higher accumulations, especially up here in areas like Rabun County, getting close to Clayton, Georgia, about a ½ inch of ice accumulation. And I definitely can attest to have seen the impacts up there in the northeast corner of the state. The GDOT website is also continuing to report just tree limb after tree limb that is continuing to be down and blocking a lot of the roads up in areas like Helen, Cleveland, getting up into northeast Georgia, closer to Toccoa and Clayton, Georgia. So as you make your way down to the Lake Lanier area, you're starting to see about a ½ inch of ice, which once again may not seem like a lot. However, a ½ inch is where the ice can begin to be problematic and has probably kept people off the roads in northeastern Georgia. And then going down into the metro Atlanta area, we still saw plenty of ice reports that did result in our fair share of some power outages. Even at one point, I know that Georgia Power and the EMC were reporting over 100,000 outages in the northern portion of the state of Georgia, and we weren't even the state with the most power outages. We've seen many areas like Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, Tennessee. All of these areas had more significant ice than we did here in the state of Georgia, but still, all of the impacts were mainly up to the north of us here in central Georgia. You can see that we do have some reports really close to us, maybe of a light glaze up here in Henry County, getting down close to Spalding and Butts counties. But we kind of lack reports up here in the northeastern corner of central Georgia as you get into Lake Sinclair right here and eventually get up into Lake Oconee to the north of that. I do imagine we had some areas that did have maybe some thin ice that was coating maybe some tree branches, maybe some areas that necessarily don't get too much sunshine. They really struggle to get above freezing temperature, but overall the impacts were very minimal. If we did see anything, it was mainly in our north and northeastern most counties. A lot like what we were saying, the risk is mainly north of Macon, just in those areas that were highlighted in the winter weather advisory. And very thankfully, we have been allowed to continue with our normal routine as we've started the new work week. So the biggest headline is cold and dry for most of the week. Until we get into the weekend, we have a few precipitation chances to talk about. And you do see that bottom headline. Are a few flurries going to be possible? We will look over the latest long-range models and give you our general thinking and obviously what the National Weather Service has highlighted this far out. We are still only in the beginning of the work week. So obviously we have a ways to go before we start talking about what's going to occur this weekend with a good deal of confidence, just like we have with the last two potential winter weather systems as we've gotten closer. But the biggest headline is going to be even colder as we go into this weekend. Remember those feels like temperatures I was showing you as of Tuesday morning? Well, if you didn't catch the morning show, we had values go down as low as 2 and 3 degrees in northern central Georgia. We have the potential to do that once again as we go into the course of this weekend, as the system that could bring maybe a few flurries or just some general rain chances is going to usher in an even colder air mass as we go across the course of this weekend. So here's a walk around the quad, clear blue sky, just like we were dealing with as of Monday afternoon. So obviously it looks mighty beautiful outside. Taking a look at the Georgia National Fairgrounds Skycam, looking over here to the west, the flags continue to blow maybe from the northwesterly direction, and that's where we actually do see the winds indicated down here in Perry. 27 degrees That is still the current temperature. We are still below freezing temperature, and we are almost at lunchtime already for your Tuesday afternoon. As if that wasn't enough, adding extra insult to the injury, it's going to be your feels like temperature. When you factor in just a 5-mile-per-hour breeze, the numbers feel 6 degrees colder than what that actual temperature sits at. So here is a look across the eastern United States, and boy, is it just frigid. You're not even seeing any of those yellow or orange shaded areas down in Florida. This frontal boundary attached to this winter storm system has made cold air go all the way down into areas of the Florida Peninsula. You know it's a very cold environment in the United States when 43 is popping up down in Orlando, 37 in Jacksonville, 36 in Panama City, and 37s across the trio of Laredo, Houston, and getting into New Orleans. Up to the north of us, actually pretty similar temperatures to what we do see here in central Georgia. 25 in Nashville, 26 up in Charlotte, another 26 in Virginia Beach, and it is still very frigid up in the mid-Atlantic and the New England portions of the country, which in fact are still holding on to some snow showers, believe it or not. Current temperature is down here in the southeast corner of the United States. 28 in Macon, matching the number up in Atlanta, up in Athens, a little bit colder in Columbus, Montgomery, up into Rome. 26 looks like one of the lowest numbers I can spot. 24 up there in upstate South Carolina in Greenville. It's kind of the coldest temperature relative to our southern and southeastern couple of states, Alabama, Georgia, getting into South Carolina and northern Florida. So across our temperature map here in central Georgia, would you believe me that our temperatures were about 10 degrees colder than this as we went into this morning? The lowest temperature that I actually saw, that's just your general air temperature, was around 16 degrees. So we have seen an increase into the upper 20s, some areas already above the 30-degree mark, 32 degrees at the warmest. So freezing temperature is the warmest temperature value here at 11 a.m. on this Tuesday morning. So obviously it is very, very frigid, and the winds are continuing to linger in the forecast. 16-mile-per-hour gusts up in Milledgeville, but sustained winds anywhere from around 3 to maybe 5, 9, or even 10 miles per hour. And like I mentioned, only a 5-mile-per-hour breeze. That is all it takes in order to create a difference between the actual temperature and the feels like temperature. So if you have a breeze of 3 miles per hour on occasion, consider yourself lucky for that brief time frame that you do have a breeze of that magnitude, because it's going to result in a feels like temperature that is still exactly the same as what your actual temperature is. We saw that popping up on many of our sky cams, specifically Dublin this morning more often than others. When the breeze would go away in Lawrence County, it would indicate the feels like temperature was the same as the actual temperature, and the actual numbers are already low enough as they are. But let's take a look at the feels like numbers, because some areas are still in the upper teens. We saw these numbers, like I mentioned, get down into the single digits farther up to the north and central Georgia today, but now they are beginning to climb back up into the 20s. But at the warmest, we feel like 25 degrees. This is just blistering, blistering cold. And I would imagine that so far our start to Tuesday has probably been the coldest start to any day that we have had throughout the winter season thus far. But at least we have sunshine, am I right? This is going to continue to lead to a warming trend as we go into the afternoon, but not a single cloud in the sky that we can spot on our satellite and radar. In fact, all of the southeast United States, it's a very quiet image as high pressure continues to settle in behind our winter weather system that moved out to the northeast. So talking about yesterday's numbers, 25 was our low temperature yesterday morning, already 11 degrees below average, and I imagine our number today going to likely be around 17 or 18 degrees, so kind of half of what 36 degrees for average is where we typically should start around this time of year. 46 degrees, 14 degrees below average of 60 degrees for this time of year. So obviously we got nowhere close to our record high of 81 degrees set back in 1950. I definitely think we could use a little bit of that. Obviously, when we had the warmer weather, we were wishing it would feel a little bit more like the winter time, but now getting as blistering cold as we are currently, the 70s and the 80s, they don't sound too shabby as of right now. But record low temperature, 12 degrees back in 1940, just 10 years prior to that record high of 81 degrees. And we did actually record a little bit of rain yesterday in the Macon area. This might have just been kind of some residual rainfall, a couple sprinkles that fell in the very early morning hours yesterday as that frontal boundary continued to make its way through and ushered in that colder air mass throughout the morning time frame yesterday. So your departure of rain, we are around an inch 1/4 of an inch below where we should be at this point in the month of January. However, we would be about 2 inches below where we should be at this point in January if we didn't receive any of the rainfall that we did get over this past weekend. Sunrise 7:33 yesterday, sunset at 6:02 p.m. We'll talk about that a lot over the coming days. But first things first, let's talk about your high temperature of 46 yesterday, which added the 11th day in the month of January that we finally had a below average day once again. So a stretch of 3 in a row now. And for the month of January as a whole, yes, we still have more days that have been above average as compared to below average. But we have, let's see, the 27th today, the 28th on Wednesday, 29th on Thursday, 30th and 31st. So we'll go all the way through the rest of this week and into the weekend, and all these days are going to be below average. So we're going to add 5 more tallies to this below average tally of 11, and that's going to put us 1 above the number of above average days that we've seen for your high temperature in January. So while we did start it out on a very warm note, like I mentioned, some 70s and some 80s that we did record just about 3 weeks ago in time, we are flipping the script completely, and that we are ending the month of January on a very cold note, so actually feeling like winter for a change. But the cold stretch has been extended over the last 2 weeks or so. I think it's about time that it comes to an end. It doesn't look like we really have an end in sight, however, as we move into February very shortly. So stay bundled up throughout this afternoon. It's going to feel a lot like Monday. The only difference that we're going to see is just a little bit of a downtick in the winds. They're not going to be gusting up to, say, 30 miles per hour like we did see yesterday. Only a gust up to 15 miles per hour. But 46 for a high temperature, that's exactly what we did hit as of yesterday, and we have those clear blue skies exactly like we had yesterday afternoon as well. But even though the winds are about half the magnitude they were as of yesterday, that is still going to have a difference in what it feels like later this afternoon. So your hour-by-hour warm-up does show that we eventually get to freezing temperature and just slightly above it at the noon hour. We continue to warm up into the afternoon, hit our high temperature sometime around 4, maybe even to 5 o'clock, and then those numbers begin to dip back down as we go closer to sunset around the 6 p.m. hour. Here's a look at your wind chills. So these are those feels like temperatures throughout today. Like I mentioned, even just a 15 mile per hour gust is going to keep the numbers very reluctant from rising above that 40-degree number. So going to feel roughly like the mid and the upper 30s throughout this afternoon. And then as we go into the evening hours, already feeling like the upper 20s as we go into the 9 p.m. time frame. And we're going to kind of coast once we get into those overnight hours, and we'll talk about the reason why that is going to occur. In fact, we'll go ahead and just flash it over to Future View and refer to that, because the rest of today looks crystal clear and quiet. Sunset going to be right here around the 6 p.m. hour, but then as we go into the nighttime hours, starting around 10 p.m., we will look at some clouds to move through. And these clouds are going to be very beneficial because they are going to help keep the numbers just a little bit warmer. And when I mean warmer, it is very, very relative once we get into the winter time frame. So warmer is going to mean not as bad as what we did feel as of this morning, but we are still going to start out tomorrow morning nice and cold. But this cloud cover should kind of slow and kind of bring the cool down into a halt overnight. And as we wake up and walk out the door on Tuesday morning, it is going to be a bit of a gloomy atmosphere. Not to worry, as we continue throughout the day on Wednesday, cloud cover decreases, and by the time we roll into sunset time around 5 to 6 p.m. on Wednesday afternoon and evening, we are looking crystal clear once again. So I anticipate that Thursday morning might see some slightly colder numbers than what we do see as of Wednesday morning. But then as we go into Thursday afternoon, we look at some cloud cover to creep back into the forecast. But it does look like it kind of starts out as high, thin level clouds. So I'm not sure if it's really going to halt the warm up as we go throughout the day on Thursday afternoon. But by the time we wrap up your Thursday, it should be a bit of a gloomy end to the day. But all we have to talk about on Future View continues to just be passing clouds. I promise you the precipitation chances are working on this graphic. We're just not seeing any of it because we have a very, very dry environment. But that will all change once we go into Friday and into Saturday. We do have a few very low precipitation chances to talk about. As far as the breeze goes, we're expecting an uptick in that as we go into the afternoon, but not to the degree that we did see yesterday. Maybe a gust up to 16, maybe even close to 20 miles per hour farther up to the north. But then that breeze subsides a little bit into tomorrow morning. Still have our fair share of some occasional gusts that could result in some feels like temperatures a little bit lower than what they actually read. And then we go into Wednesday afternoon. we once again see a breeze build in farther up to the north in the state of Georgia. And then once we go into Thursday, that breeze finally starts to begin to subside as we go into the morning hours and completely does go away throughout Thursday afternoon. So I would expect Thursday afternoon to be the one day over the course of the next 3 days that we're actually going to have some feels-like numbers that are very similar to what the actual temperatures read in terms of your high temperatures. In terms of the feels-like numbers, let's go ahead and jump into that. So this is, once again, factoring in the wind gusts that we could see. That's going to be your wind chill, your feels-like temperature. That is the same thing. So that's what future view feels like does mean, and we'll follow the timestamps through each afternoon and each morning. Throughout this afternoon, still feeling like the upper 30s. I wouldn't be surprised if we creep up to around 40 degrees. Then tomorrow morning, not even really into the morning hours, this is actually going to be very early and overnight, 24 and 26. That's actually the time we should have our lowest feels like temperatures, and then we should see them maybe bump up a few degrees as we go into actual sunrise time. Trying to see the green color creep back up into central Georgia as we go into Wednesday at 3 p.m. Maybe if you live over to the east and the southeast, I'm looking at Vidalias, I'm looking at McRae's, maybe even some Sopertons. That's where we have the potential to maybe feel like 50 degrees tomorrow afternoon, which is at least tolerable to be outside for that afternoon time frame. Then going into Thursday morning, feels like numbers back down into the mid-20s. Going into the afternoon, that green color farther down to the south, but areas farther to the north still holding on to feels like numbers somewhere in the upper half of the 40s. Main messaging is I could go ahead and throw a pause point on any time of any day for the foreseeable future. It's not as bad as we did see this morning. It's not as bad as we saw yesterday afternoon, and we will see this afternoon. However, it is still going to be cold, so make sure that you are continuing to bundle up, but it will be at least a little more suitable to spend some time outdoors with high temperatures near 50 degrees on Wednesday and Thursday afternoons. Just make sure you have the layering, make sure you have the beanie cap. We're not going to have as gusty of winds as we did have on Monday afternoon as well, so that is going to be a very good thing. So let's talk about your afternoon highs as we head into the weekend. 51 goes into 53 on Friday afternoon, but then they take another drop down. Now I'm going to go ahead and tell you that Saturday already has a good deal of disagreement as far as the high temperature goes. We have some models calling for actually some mid-30s for high temperatures, but then we have some models that are calling for maybe some mid-40s. So I kind of went with more of a middle ground high temperature. Nonetheless, it is going to be colder than what we see on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday as we go into your Saturday afternoon. It's just a matter of how much, and that is going to be very important, especially surrounding our precipitation chances. So 17 was the morning low for the actual temperature this morning. We had a couple areas that got down to 16 degrees, but I think Macon will register a 17-degree mark. Then 27, 25, 28, numbers that are a little bit closer to average, but still below average. So that's what I mean. Yes, it'll feel a little bit more tolerable, but it is still going to be cold. It is still going to be below average. So obviously make sure that you continue to wear your favorite hoodie, whatever warm layers that you do have as you walk out the door each and every morning. And these numbers going to be below freezing temperature, below 32 degrees. So it's going to be important that you take those proper precautions to protect those pipes, protect your plants, protect your pets, all the 4 Ps, and people. Make sure that you are protecting yourself in order of dressing warm as you do go outside each and every day. Crank up the car a little bit ahead of time before you have to head out and about. Cranking up the heat all the way for just a couple of minutes will make it much easier to hop in the car and start driving down the road. I can attest to that. I started up the car about 15 minutes early this morning before getting in, and I felt mighty fine instead of being shivering on those first 5 minutes of the drive until the heat does officially crank up. But we do see the numbers go back down between Friday and into Saturday. And like I mentioned, each of the next 5 mornings forecasted to go below that 32-degree mark. In fact, that continues to be the case into Sunday morning and into Monday morning, where we could be forecasting some more numbers like what you saw as of this morning. So we are looking at another cool down to be in store as we go across the course of this weekend. And if any precipitation chances try to line up with that overnight and early morning time frame, I think that's the window where they could be below that 32-degree mark. But let's take a look at what the long-range models do have. Few splotchy showers throughout your Friday afternoon. Once again, Friday afternoon forecasted to actually be the warmest day that we do have ahead, with high temperatures in the low 50s. So anything that comes in the way of the second half of your Friday, obviously 10 p.m. the numbers will begin to cool down. but I don't think they'll cool down maybe as much as we could see in light of the cloudy skies that we continue to have present. But 10 p.m., I imagine this is still going to be of the rain variety. It's a matter of what time some precipitation comes into the picture on Saturday that could result in maybe something of the frozen nature. Now, this is just showing you the precipitation rate according to the GFS and the Euro. This is just a really good depiction about how heavy of whatever form of precipitation is continuing to fall. So if you have a lighter green shade, that's going to indicate a lighter precipitation rate, more so some light showers, maybe even some steady showers as you start to get into the dark green. But once you start to flash up some yellows, some oranges, maybe even some reds like you see here in some pockets off the Atlantic coast, that's going to be some heavier showers or some heavier rates of precipitation, or even some heavy snow showers if that is of the frozen nature. But what we see happening over the course of the end of this week is actually going to take place down on the Gulf Coast of Texas. This is going to be a low pressure center that establishes itself, and it moves all the way across the Gulf, and it goes all the way across the Florida Peninsula. So this low pressure system is looking to cross us down to the south. Now, how far north that low pressure system treks up is going to be very influential for our forecast. But right now it's forecasted across the peninsula of Florida, like the central Florida area, Tampa, talking Ocala, maybe even down to the Orlando and Cape Canaveral area. And then it's going to cross over into the Atlantic Ocean. But once it does that, it's going to take a turn up to the north, and it is going to ride up the eastern seaboard of the United States. So that's what you see all out here, this mess over to the east of South and North Carolina. And a little bit of that moisture could wrap back around, and it could start to creep into eastern Georgia as we go sometime into Saturday. But areas of eastern Georgia, I'm going to go ahead and preface that right now, you have the best chance of seeing anything in the way of precipitation or maybe something of the winter weather nature as we go into this weekend, because you will be closer to the center of this low pressure, and the closer you are to that center of low pressure, there is going to be a whole lot more moisture in your forecast. But it does look like Saturday is that main window that we could see anything in the way of rain, anything in the way of wintry weather. Then we go into Sunday, looks like things clear out as that low pressure system continues to ride up the Atlantic coast. And we will go into the beginning of next week nice and clear, maybe a few shots at some passing cloud cover like we're talking about over the course of the next few days, but it does remain a relatively quiet forecast. Nothing that looks as definitive as those precipitation chances as we were looking at last weekend's system. So here's a look at the precipitation type. Now we're going to start to differentiate between rain and between something of the frozen nature. So once again, these pink shaded areas, that's what we were talking about as of this past weekend. That's your wintry mix, that's your sleet, that's your freezing rain. And then you start to get into kind of the purple and white colors, and that is going to indicate your steady snowfall. So that cluster that moves through maybe as early as Friday night, it is looking to be of the rain variety like we were talking about. High temperatures on Friday afternoon going to be in the low 50s as we go into the evening hours. Yes, they are going to begin to cool down, but they're very likely going to be somewhere in the 40s. They won't have had too much time to cool down. It would be more so the early morning hours that we would have the time frame for maybe something of the frozen nature. Now, right now, the GFS model, it is showing that we will have something in the way of some maybe steady flurries that try to creep in as early as the noon window. I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now, number one, this model is going to be the most bullish on something in the way of wintry weather, which means this model is going to show probably the most drastic impacts that we would have in the way of potential winter weather. But also number two, this is lunchtime. Our warm-up will have begun already, and in fact, the GFS model, I'll go ahead and tell you, it forecasted a high of 45 degrees on Saturday afternoon. So we'll be well on our way to hitting that 45-degree number because we're only a couple hours off when we hit that high temperature. So I don't anticipate the numbers to be somewhere below freezing temperature going into the noon hour on Saturday, but obviously either the model run is getting something wrong or at least the numbers are going to be incorrect. But that's the timing according to this GFS model, and it's saying that East Central Georgia, Northeast Central Georgia has the potential for maybe a few hours of some steady flurries. If this scenario plays out, it's going to be a very light dusting of snow. Maybe some very, 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 very minor accumulations that aren't resulting in any impacts. That is looking like the best case scenario and kind of the upper end for the chances of anything in the way of wintry weather. As we go overnight into early Sunday morning when our temperatures are going to be very cold, and you can see South Carolina and North Carolina, their numbers are very cold as well. That's why they have a much better chance of seeing something in the form of wintry weather throughout this weekend. But we are just on the edge of where that moisture is going to be on the westernmost end. So obviously going over to the east, that's where that low pressure center is. And the closer you are to that center of low pressure, that's where more moisture is. So areas to the east of us are going to have better chances of some wintry weather as opposed to us a little bit farther over to the west. And then we go into Sunday. Sunday looks crystal clear according to both models. We'll go ahead and tell you that. So once again, either sometime late Friday or into maybe early morning, even as late as Saturday afternoon, but I just told you why I'm not putting too much stock into that belief. That's looking like the timing for our potential precipitation chances. Now we go into Friday, and once again, we do see this cluster of some rain trying to creep through to our south according to the European model. And here's all the European model does have in the way of potential wintry weather. If you walk out the door early on Saturday morning, you might have a brief window. I'm talking about an hour or two, maybe where you could see a couple of flurries, but it's not going to accumulate whatsoever. And that was just barely clipping northeast central Georgia. This is what I have more confidence in because those precipitation chances of the wintry variety and of the snow variety do actually line up with the time of day when we would possibly be above freezing temperature. But even then, I'm not putting too much stock into it because it is barely moving into central Georgia. So obviously we're going to see a lot of wiggle and a lot of wobble with these long range models until we get closer. We're going to want to stay updated, especially once we can get our short range, higher resolution models within view. So where do those chances stand as of right now? This would be the third possible weekend here in central Georgia with potential winter weather. I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now, do not get your hopes up. The chances of seeing anything are very low. We have very high confidence in those chances being very low as of right now. But if anyone is to see anything, the chances are looking greater over to the east, mainly east of I-75. So I'm talking about your Wrightsvilles, I'm talking about Dublin, I'm talking more so about Washington County, Hancock County, maybe even up into Milledgeville. That's if we see anything, but I just told you the chances are looking very, very unlikely as of right now. But say we are to go the GFS route, if we see anything, we're really talking about maybe a few hours of some light flurries and a very light accumulation at the very most. Obviously, we would need a lot of ingredients to come together. And the main thing that I'm seeing right now, model runs are not lining up with the time of day and the temperatures that are going to be present in order for possibly something of the winter weather variety. It's all going to depend on if sub-freezing temperatures will line up with when that moisture does try to enter central Georgia, if that moisture is to enter central Georgia. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw those precipitation chances move off over to the east with the next model run. We obviously could watch them push over to the west, but right now the chances are looking very, very low. This is probably the least confidence that I've had of the past three systems that have moved through of us seeing anything in the way of impacts. And we did actually get a good dusting of snow, maybe about an inch or two of snow as of 2 weeks ago. Right now, not even looking like it would be that much if we do even see anything of that wintry weather variety. So what you will see on your 7-day forecast, it's going to be a rain chance because right now I'm seeing drastic disagreement amongst the model runs, and right now I need to see some lower temperatures. Like I mentioned, 39 is a bit of a middle ground temperature. We have some models calling for some mid-30s for high temperatures, which would decrease the window that we would be above freezing temperature. If we do that, then obviously whatever time moisture comes in, it's very likely that the numbers are going to be below that magic 32-degree number. So of course, some wintry weather would be of a greater chance. But the one model that showed the most widespread snow showers was the GFS model. Its forecasted high on Saturday afternoon is 45 degrees. So obviously those chances coming in the afternoon and the evening hours, those numbers are very likely to be above 32 degrees. So there is a lot that we need to fine tune with that, and we need to see the models get into better agreement of at least what the temperatures are going to be as we go throughout Saturday. But one thing is for certain, as this system does pass through us, mainly down to the south and the southeast, and eventually moves up the coast, that counterclockwise rotation is going to usher down another much colder air mass from the north. And that's going to result in Sunday morning going into Monday morning, which is going to be Groundhog Day. That's going to be the window where we also have the potential for some more mid to even upper teens for actual low temperatures. If we pair that up with breezy conditions, we're very likely looking at the possibility of some single-digit feels-like temperatures once again for the first day of February on Sunday morning. Sunday afternoon going to be very, very cold as well, with another high temperature of 39 degrees. And then Groundhog Day going to be off to a very, very cold start. So before we get there, the main highlight will be at least some slightly more tolerable temperatures. It's still going to be cold each and every day of your 7-day forecast. I want to go ahead and preface that. But if you want a time that you maybe can get outside, do a couple of things, maybe out in the yard, maybe go on a walk your dog, the afternoon time frame is going to be your best bet for really around that 2 to maybe even 5 o'clock window as of right now. Then we get up to 53. We have those slim rain chances around Friday evening. Then going into Saturday, I'm holding on to a 20% chance of rain as of right now because I'm not seeing anything that's lining up in the way of wintry precipitation. If that changes, then you will be the first to know. But once again, the winter weather chances are looking very, very unlikely. And then we're going to drop the numbers down even more as we go into the first day of February. Then we go into Groundhog Day, and I think I'm just going to pass the weather baton off to him. And hopefully he can give us an end to this stretch of winter and won't give us 6 more weeks of winter. Hopefully we can have a very early spring that is going to be on the horizon. But it remains to be seen what Beauregard Lee does predict. We'll, of course, be trying to update you all throughout the day as we go into that fun holiday as of next Monday. But until then, where things stand, enjoy winter. And this week, winter is out in full force. Hopefully we can get at least some near average numbers in the near future, but only time will tell. Right now, your 7-day forecast is just looking blistering, blistering cold. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you once again tomorrow at 11 a.m.